every hour. I believe He is praying for me. The background of my presentation is very simple, but it's been a long journey for me. When I found my topic of dissertation, I thought that it would be very simple for me to write an introduction, especially the methodology. When I went to the library and looked at some dissertations in biblical studies, especially under the subheadings of methodology, some would say this dissertation implements or follow the historical grammatical method of interpretation. When it comes to the book of Revelation, many studies would say the author follows the historicist approach of interpretation. Then I wrote that methodology for about one paragraph, and I was very happy. I went to see my advisor, Dr. Joel Musosi, and he said, that is not enough. You cannot simply assume. You cannot simply say that you will just take this historicist approach. What are your reasons that you would like to follow the historicist approach to the book of Revelation? That statement really put me into a long work for about 2 months, only to look at the book of Revelation and how I can find some biblical foundation that I will use the historicist approach in interpreting the Apocalypse, and not simply relying on what scholars have said. So, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to present now is only part of my dissertation. In fact, it is 1/3 of my introduction to my dissertation, and the other 2/3 has been the result of my simple research during my ministry and service here at IAS. So up to this point of time, after being granted the rank of full professor, what I can share with you is only an introduction. And this makes me feel and realize that now I know very little, and in fact, I know nothing. All the glory is for the Lord. Interpreting Revelation. I intentionally put this in a true or false question. Although many of you would know already what the answer may be, but usually in a true or false question, the teacher will ask, if it is true, what is the reason? And if it is false, what is the reason? Among the 4 interpretive approaches to the book of Revelation, the historicist approach has been challenged the most. Dr. Gerald Hassel says that futurism is knocking at the door of historicism, urging to modify, challenge, and if possible, replace the historicist method of prophetic interpretation. What are the responses or reactions of our scholars? Of course, we have our beloved Adventist scholars, and each of them has tried their best in order to respond to this challenge, to this very dear approach that we Adventists are using when it comes to the book of Revelation. One scholar says that a good commentary on Revelation does not favor any particular one of the traditional approaches. Another is trying to redefine the meaning of historicist approach. Another would say that if Adventists wish to revive the historicist approach to Revelation, they will need to pursue a thoroughgoing examination of the genre of Revelation's visionary passages on a case-by-case basis. So what we need is biblical foundation. What we need is literary indicators from the book of Revelation itself, of course, with the support of the other books in the Bible, especially the book of Daniel, in order to say that, yes, I can base my interpretation of the book of Revelation on the historicist approach. So there are three indicators that I would like to share with you this afternoon. The first one is a proposed structure of Revelation based on the purpose of the book. The second one is an analysis of a sequence marker, metatauta, after these things, that is used very frequently in the book of Revelation. And the last one is an analysis of the divine title, the Alpha and the Omega. Let us now come to the first indicators or first argument to answer the true or false question, and that is the structure of the book. I found out that based on the purpose of the book of Revelation, we may come up with a structure, or if we hesitate to call it a structure, at least we can call it an outline of the book. Because the structure is really stated in Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, that the book is to show to the servants of God what must soon take place. With this awareness of the structure, readers of the book of Revelation who lived in the first centuries must be very cautious and aware that they would like to see whether the purpose is really met in the writing or in the letter they just received from the Apostle John. And then when we read again Revelation 1 verse 19, there, once again, the purpose is re-emphasized. John was instructed to write two things that he has seen. The first one is things which are, and the second one is things that will take place after these things. Interestingly, after reading the seven churches, which is Revelation 2 and 3, and when these readers came to Revelation chapter 4, verse 1, they missed these things which are. Instead, what they had was only things which must take place after this. And so, of course, even for this very little section, there are many interpretations. I will just go with one of them, if not adding to them. So now we can see that in between this 1:19 and 4 verse 1, you have these two chapters, Revelation chapter 2 and chapter 3, and I'm reading it with an understanding, therefore, that the seven churches, besides describing the local situations of the literal seven churches during the time of John, these seven churches also, in a sense, portray what will take place after this. And what comes beyond from chapter 4, verse 1, is concerned only about things which must take place after this. And this goes on until we find one more time the same verb, although it is in different form. It is no longer in an indicative form, but it is now it is no longer in infinitive form. It is now in indicative with a perfect tense, a gegonan, which is also from ginomai. That means it is done. And so, I would like to say that the book of Revelation portrays what happened during the first century, during the time of the 7 literal churches. And it went on through the timeline of history until everything is done. And so the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, the 7 plagues, the second coming and millennium, new heaven and new earth. By the time what takes place in Revelation 21, verse 6, now we know that they have taken place. I don't want to spend much time about the center of the book, because we all know that this is the summary of the great controversy. And even I would like to say, without dishonoring the scriptures, even when I'm reading the book of Revelation from chapter 1 until chapter 11 verse 9, and I will just, chapter 11 verse 19, and I would just skip chapter 12, I would skip chapter 13, I would skip chapter 14, and go directly to chapter 15, I will have still a complete story. But in order for me to understand that long story, at least I have to know the summary of the story that is described at the center of the book, and that is Revelation 12, 13, and 14. And now we know that we have the local application of the book, and this is the section of the 7 churches, which at the same time also portray the historical timeline up to the end. And we have also the historical section of the book from chapter 4 on. The question is, when is the start, at least as far as the writing in the book is concerned, the start of the eschatological section? I would like to propose that it starts in chapter 15, verse 1, when we have the writing or the statement about the 7 last plagues. This is not the first time the word plague occur in the book, because the word plague is already there in Revelation chapter 9, verse 20 and 21, about the trumpet number 6. But although that plague is there, that plague is not called the last plagues. This is the last plagues. And I would like to say that this is also the beginning of the eschatological section about all the events pertaining to the future, things that will take place in the future. And that is the section of the 7 last plagues. So in summary, this is the outline, if we are not comfortable in calling it a structure, of the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter, excluding the prologue and the epilogue. Revelation chapter 2 and chapter 3 has this local and yet historical application. Revelation chapter 4, verse 1 to 11, verse 19 has this historical application, and that covers the seals and the trumpets. And then you have the center of the book, and from chapter 15 onward, you have the eschatological section of the book. Now, that is the first argument that I would like to share with you in order to answer that true or false question. Let me add one more witness, and that is the significance of the time sequence marker meta tauta, that is usually translated after this or after these things. Meta tauta is a literary device functioning as a marker of time sequence in biblical narratives. Whenever you see this marker or sequence marker meta tauta after this, then you will know that you are reading a story. You will know that you are reading a narrative. It is found 35 times in the New Testament, and mostly used by John the Apostle, 12 times in the Gospel of John, and 10 times in the book of Revelation. So 22 times in the Gospel of John and Revelation. This means Revelation is, in a sense, presented in a narrative framework. Narratives have sequence order from one scene to the other, one episode to the next. Now let us see that, in fact, the story in the book or the narrative in the book of Revelation is simply a continuation of the narrative that John, the author, has started in the Gospel of John, when John says, "In the beginning." And then when you read Revelation chapter 21, verse 6, and that is already a description post-millennium, after millennium, then John says, "It is done." So, the book of, or the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation presents a narrative from in the beginning until it is done. And in between, in the beginning and it is done, you have this time sequence marker of meta tauta. Plenty of them we can find in John. Time will not allow us to go through all of this. Now, there are two functions of this phrase meta tauta in Revelation. First, meta tauta in Revelation portray for us the sequence of the audio-visual experience of John. In other words, John would say, "After this I heard, after this I saw. Then after this I heard, after this I saw. After this I heard, after this I saw." You have this either seeing or hearing whenever you have this sequence marker meta tauta. And the second function of the sequence marker is to portray not the sequence of the audio-visual experience of John, but the sequence of the apocalyptic events that John saw or that John heard. And we can find in the book of Revelation that the sequence of the hearing and seeing experience of John is not parallel, or is not necessarily parallel with the sequence of the apocalyptic events. For example, you have there the sealing described in chapter 7. But even toward the end of chapter 6, you have already a description related to the second coming of Christ. Of course, sealing takes place before the second coming, but in the experience of John, seeing those things, he saw that it was presented to him after the presentation of Revelation chapter 6. So they are not parallel. And for these two kinds of narratives, namely the narratives of the audiovisual experience of John and the apocalyptic narrative itself, we can see that it is not always parallel. And here we have some references from the book of Revelation about this audiovisual experience of John. After this, I saw, I heard, I saw, I heard. Then you can see the list completely. And then in the next list, you can see the meta-tauta without the audiovisual verbs. You don't have there the word blepo. You don't have there the word orao. You don't have the word to see. You don't have the word to hear. So these are the meta-tauta phrases that describes the sequence of the apocalyptic events itself. For example, let me take one of these four occurrence of the meta-tauta. Revelation chapter 9 verse 12, for example. One woe is past. Behold, still two more woes are coming after these things. This is not simply a sequence of what John is seeing, but this is a sequence of the real apocalyptic event itself. Revelation chapter 20 verse 3, for example, Satan is released after the 1,000 years ended. After the 1,000 years, then Satan is released. It is not describing simply the audiovisual sequence, but it is the sequence of the apocalyptic event itself. Let me skip this. So the apocalyptic narrative begins with things which are in the book of Revelation and continues with after these things and ends with it is done. And this may follow the pattern of the Gospel of John that begins with in the beginning, and then you have there it is finished. To combine the two, you will have in the beginning up to it is done. I would like to follow the argument of Dr. John Paulin, who uses Daniel chapter 2 as a passage to test other passages to see whether those other passages may fall under the category of what he calls as historical apocalyptic. It is only when a passage can be categorized as a historical apocalyptic based on Daniel chapter 2, then that passage also may require a historicist approach. And here you can see in Daniel chapter 2, comparing with the whole book of Revelation, Daniel chapter 2 describes, about the statue. In chapter 2, verse 28, I would like to call it as a prologue. It says, "What will take place in the last days," says Daniel to Nebuchadnezzar. Then Daniel continues with his explanation after he describes Nebuchadnezzar as the head of the statue. Then he says, "After you," this is a sequence, and comes the second, and then the third, and then the fourth kingdom. And then at the end, Daniel chapter 2, verse 45. Daniel says, this is about what will take place in the last days. Again, the introduction is repeated at the end. So also with the book of Revelation in general. It begins with things that must shortly take place. And then after that, you have after these things, you have all of these a series of these seven churches, seals, and trumpets. And at the end, the introduction is repeated, and it says, this is about what will take place in the last days. And so, if we would like to assess the whole book of Revelation in general, compared to Daniel chapter 2, then we can say that we can use the historicist approach to the book of Revelation, not only from chapter 4 of the book, but even from the beginning of the book. Of course, we treated the prologue differently, but from the series of the 7 churches, we can use the historicist approach. I'm sure after this lecture, someone will stop me out there to say, I do not agree with you. But it's all right. And then the third argument for me to answer that true or false question is the significance of the title of Christ the Revelator. And that is his title as the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. Christ says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. Of course, we all, as Bible students, understand that names come in a passage or in a story not without a purpose. That name is usually related to the context of that passage. And so the question is why God and Jesus Christ is introduced in Revelation as the Alpha and the Omega. There are many examples. Let's take the other book written by the same author, the Gospel of John, where you have this ego eimi title of Jesus Christ, when Jesus is introduced as the I Am. 27 times in the Gospel of John, when Jesus introduced himself as I am the bread of life. This is much related with the story that just took place before that, when Jesus fed 5,000 with only 5 loaves of bread. Jesus also introduced himself as I am the way. It is because the disciples was asking him, show us the way. How can we go to you if we do not know the way? And so forth. We have some examples in the Gospel of John. And so here also in the book of Revelation, we ask the same questions. What is the context that really require Christ to introduce himself as the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end? Well, I believe Dr. Mora, Professor Mora, may explain to you even much better when it comes to the last 3 chapters of the book of Daniel. Daniel chapter 10, Daniel chapter 11, and Daniel chapter 12. Have you read his book? And I'm comparing now the experience that John has when he saw Jesus Christ described in Revelation chapter 1, verses 9 up to verse 17 and 18, and the experience of Daniel when he saw a divine being in Daniel chapter 10. It amazes me, at least myself, that we can see parallels connecting or relating the title of Jesus Christ and the instruction to both Daniel and John not to be afraid. Of course, after one has seen a divine being, a natural reaction would be that person will become afraid. But this is not simply the cause why John and Daniel were afraid. They were afraid because they didn't know exactly what they have seen. And because of that, God sent to them angel, or in this case, Jesus Christ himself, to tell the visionaries that they will know the future, that they will be explained about the meaning of what they have seen. And based on this, I would like to say, I'm very fast now, I would like to see, okay, this is the parallel. You have the time of the vision, you have the experience of seeing divine being, and then you have also the response of the prophet, and then you have the words of encouragement, and then you have there the reasons not to fear. If we see Daniel chapter 10, 11, and 12 in the framework of historicist approach, then we cannot avoid seeing also the book of Revelation in the same framework of approach. That is what I can see. Let me skip this. These two last slides that I am showing you is giving an argument why Daniel was afraid. It was not simply because he saw a divine being. Every time after receiving a vision, he would feel something. His mind would be disturbed, he became weak, and so on and so forth. And only after that, God will send an angel to explain the meaning to Daniel. And so, let me come to the conclusion of the matter in order to answer the question that I asked myself. By the way, for you who would like to note an Old Testament background, you can go to Isaiah chapter 44, verses 2, 6, and 7, that connect "do not afraid" with "I am the beginning and at the end." And it is about someone who knows what will take place even right now after this and even in the future. You can use this as an Old Testament background to understand Revelation chapter 1. I'm illustrating also this in the message